All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to another Lure Lab episode here on the Serious Angler Network. And as always, I am your host, the Captain, Andrew Full. And I just want to take a second to apologize for missing an episode last week. It was completely on me. I don't like missing episodes, but I had a couple lined up, and one of them, one of our guests that we were going to have on had really poor service. He was getting ready for the Open on the St. Lawrence. And up in the Clayton region, from Clayton to Waddington, there's really bad service and it's hard to get a good cell phone signal, and he didn't have Wi-Fi. So we will get him on here in the future to talk about the technique that he wanted to talk about, and it'll be a really good one, and I'll keep that a surprise for now. But today's episode, we are diving into possibly one of my absolute favorite techniques, and it's a topwater technique, and we're talking poppers. We've had a lot of requests for a popper episode, and I was talking to Bailey about it, and we're like, who's the best person to get on for a popper episode? And we have a good one. We have Ty Berger coming on from Bass Fishing HQ. Has an awesome YouTube page, extremely informational. So we'll put that down in the description so you guys can go over. If you do not follow and subscribe to his page already, you will be able to do that. It's one of the best, so make sure you follow along. But so I don't keep rambling here, we can get right on topic. Let's get Ty on. Hey, man, how's it going?
Good. How's it going with you, man?
Not too bad. We're in the heat of the summer. We were talking offline before this about smallmouth and how they seem to be setting up oddly right now in the post-spawn funk. But honestly, I wish I could catch them on top water.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing better than
Yeah.
smallmouth blowing up on a popper. And I got one to eat it a couple weeks ago, like right when our mayfly hatch started. And it's like, it's always like a depth charge getting dropped off like the back of a warship when they split it. So that's why it's extremely exciting. But
yeah,
what kind of, like, how's Ohio? You guys got some
Ohio.
crazy weather.
Yeah, Ohio's been odd this year. You guys have probably experienced all the like Canadian smoke.
Oh, it's been awful.
And it really is. We've had that, and it's just been odd here because you'll have a week where it's hot and sticky, typical Ohio, and then the next week it's kind of cooler and we have that smoke that rolls in.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of our lakes locally are a little bit cooler water temps than they normally have been. Although we have had some spikes here recently where it did get really hot. But yeah, man, it's been the kind of the same thing for me. We've had some good top water fishing at times, and not great at times. Not quite as consistent as it has been over the last couple of years. And I think part of that might be just because of this kind of odd weather with the Canadian smoke. So
Yeah. When I feel like with poppers, you actually need like some sunlight, but you also want it to be low light conditions a lot of times. And
yeah,
you can create low light conditions even on a high sunny day based on where you're fishing. And we'll talk about that shortly. But I mean, popper fishing, it's incredible. So we'll get started here. And there's a lot of people who might be listening in that are brand new to bass fishing. That's their first time ever. So can you describe to them what a popper is?
yeah. I've got one right here. I'll hold it up, and a popper is just what it kind of sounds like. It's a bait that makes a popping noise, and it's a top water bait. So you cast it out there, it hits the water, and you can work this a number of different ways, and we'll get into that. But the big thing with it is it's called a popper for a reason. You pop it in the water, it kind of makes a big bubble, kind of makes a bloop noise, and that's all it really is. And it's a great bait. I think for a lot of anglers, this is one of the baits that you hear a lot about when you are getting into bass fishing and beginning in fishing. And for me, I used to use a popper a lot when I was really, really young, like when I was first starting to get into fishing. And then I kind of set it aside for a while. I started using, the walking style baits a lot, and the plopper style baits, and a lot of different top waters. But over the last probably, I'd say 6 years, I have really, really gotten back into fishing a popper. And one of the big reasons is I think that guys do what exactly I just said. They kind of get away from throwing this bait. And so when you're throwing something that is different, that maybe isn't used as much, I feel like you have a chance at catching a lot of fish and a lot of big fish. And so that's kind of what a popper is to me. It's a great bait in a pond. It's a great bait in a river. It's a great bait in a big lake. So it's a very versatile bait, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But that's the popper.
Now, kind of dive right into the versatility of a popper, right? Like before we have hit all these other questions. But you know, with a popper, there's all kinds of different shapes and sizes. And can you talk about like the differences between a popper that chugs, one that walks, and maybe one that like you want to work real slow? Because they all are a little bit different, right?
They are. That's the big thing with these baits is that almost every major brand in the industry makes some sort of popper style bait. Now, with that being said, they are a lot more different than I would like this. Every brand also makes a spook style bait, a walking topwater bait. Now, in my opinion, the walking topwater baits are all pretty much the same. They typically might have a different noise. They're going to look a little bit different, but when you cast that out and you reel it in, that bait looks pretty much the same. I mean, it's going back and forth, back and forth. Now, a popper, like you just said, some of these baits, like for instance, this is literally called a chug bug.
Is that a pre-Rapala chug bug or is it a post-Rapala chug bug?
I don't know. I don't know to tell
Hit you
you.
with the tough questions to start, right?
It's one that I've had for a while, and I didn't pick it up until I saw Seth Feider catching them up on the what was that, the river years and
Yeah.
years ago. And I'm like, I need to pick that sucker back up, which it's very loud bait. But anyways,
Sorry.
no, you're fine. You can get off on big tangents. But poppers, like Andrew was saying here, is they can be vastly different. And you're going to have some of these baits that walk really well. So they will walk just like your spook style baits. Now, you can almost get most of them to do that, but some are going to walk a lot better than others. This is a little arc popper that I'm holding up right here. This one actually walks really, really well. It's very effortless to just kind of cast it out there and walk it, and it's going to walk really tightly. And then there's other baits though. For instance, like this is a little, what is this? A Strike King KVD Splash. This is the junior size. This is kind of the regular size here.
That's like
And
your favorite popper of all time, isn't it?
this is one of my favorite poppers. They will walk, but the thing that I like about these baits, and the one that I use, the technique I use a lot for them is what I call spitting it, where I'm really kind of tight line popping the bait. So instead of popping it on a slack line, I will spit the bait, which makes that water, instead of bloop, it just kind of spits the water up in front of the bait. And it might spit it up 2 foot, 3 foot. It's more splashing. And I fish around a lot of bass that are not always necessarily eating bluegill. They're eating a lot more little minnows, little shad, little bait fish. And I think when you're around those type of bass that are eating those small bait fish, those spitting style top waters, the ones that like this KVD Splash, tend to work a little bit better. Now, if I am fishing around those bluegill eaters, that's typically when I'm going to pop that popper on a slack line to really make it kind of bloop, bleep, or I'm going to walk that bait. So that's kind of the big thing with poppers, is that they are all a little bit different. I wish that I could say one popper was better than another. This is probably one of the more unique poppers out there on the market. This is the little, I think it's the Booyah Prank. This is one that I was given, and I didn't pick it up for years. But this is a really interesting bait to me too. The bad thing about this one is it can be, if you're making a really long cast with this bait, it doesn't always work the best as a popper. But the thing with it, as you can see, is it has a small little bill on it. And that small bill will make that bait just kind of shimmy if you reel it in, it'll just dive about a half a foot, if even that, below the surface, and it'll just kind of work back to you. And I have used this on a couple of days where you're working it like a popper and then you don't get bit and you go to reel it and your fish bites it. So it's like those fish get honed in on the bait and they're thinking about biting it, but they're not willing to commit to it. And then as soon as you start reeling it, they think that this fish is getting away from them and they'll hit it. And it's been incredible. Like, I still don't throw this as much as I should. mostly because of those long casts, but I really want to pick it up a little bit more because I think it could be very effective. And I think it could catch fish that just other baits don't
Hmm.
because of that little shimmy action it does. So
It sounds like when you're on a popper bite, you should have a popper and that tied up. So when they don't, or they miss the popper, say, like a bass will miss a popper by like 4 feet sometimes. You're like, what are you doing? That might be a good alternative to
yeah,
maybe reel. And when they miss it, you can reel it a little bit and see if they fire on it or
yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Like,
to me, this is a better close range. That's a big thing. Like I said, if you make a long cast, it's a bear. And
mhm,
honestly, I'm when I fish poppers here locally, I'm mostly long casting them over flats, grass flats, rock flats. I will go up and, for example, fish a bluegill bed or something like that, where I'm kind of working it near cover a lot too.
mhm.
Those are kind of the big, for me. Those are the big areas that I'm going to do it. It's going to be shallow, tight to cover type stuff or on a shallow, larger flat. So those are kind of the areas that I like to target, and those are just kind of the big differences in the poppers that are out there. So I go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, I was going along with you there. But I mean, while we're talking about like casting and what you're doing, can you talk about your popper setup, like rod, reel, line choice? Because
Yeah,
there are a lot of people who like you throw a popper on braid, and then there's braid to mono, then there's the straight mono believer. So I want to have your take.
yeah. So I know I have a spook style bait rigged up here, but this is the same rod that I primarily use those poppers for. So this is a 7 foot 2 inch moderate action. It's a medium power rod. It's a moderate action. So it's got that give to it. It's got quite a bit of give. It's got more of a parabolic bend. I think that anytime I fish treble hooked lures, that is the rod that I go to. Even if it's a really big bait, like a swim bait, like a glide bait, I still like a parabolic bend simply because it's going to help those treble hooked fish stay pegged. So that is what I like to use. I've pretty much gone to straight braid, not straight braid. I've pretty much gone to braid though as my main line for all of my top water fishing. I've had issues in the past where I remember as a kid throwing straight mono because you want to use mono with your top water baits. But if you make a super long cast, which that's the other thing, you can make a really long cast with mono. I think people think you can make a substantially longer cast with braid, which you can to me it's almost equal. Like you might be able to get a little bit more distance out of braid, but you can actually cast pretty far with mono. But anyways, with that mono, mono stretches on average about 25%.
Mhm.
So if you make 100 foot cast, which is something that with top water fishing, I always make the longest cast possible. If you go to set the hook like that if you're stretching at 25%, that's 25 feet of stretch. So you have to, if you're using straight mono, you really have to critique your rod. For me back in the day, I used to use a really long rod, like a 7'6" with straight mono because that would help me get a good hook set at that distance. But the thing with using a 7'6" rod is it's a bear to work a popper when you're working it really fast or even slow. It's just a long rod. So the rod that I have now, again, it's 7'2". It's kind of that happy medium rod. I feel like I can get a great long distance cast, but with using that braided line, I don't have to worry about it stretching at all. I'm going to get a good hook set. Now, I do put on with all my top water baits some sort of leader, and it's usually very short. Um, Honestly, I use 20-pound monofilament every single time. This is the length of my leader. So you can see here, it's about 18 inches. I might start with it at 2 foot and work it down. I'll use it as short as probably about 8 inches. Um, but that's something that I've done a lot of because this mono does give you a little extra stretch here, a little extra give. And the big thing with the mono and you really do want to use a heavier mono if possible. You could honestly use fluorocarbon with this too. Like it's such a short distance that it's not going to really impact the bait. So you don't have to go out and buy a spool of mono, even though it's super cheap. But the thing with the heavier mono, like 20-pound that I use here, is that it simply keeps that front hook from getting fouled up on the bait. If you use straight braid, a lot of times you're working this popper all over, you're popping it, you're stopping it, you're letting it sit there. A lot of times with a popper, it's actually gonna sit in the water like this, and that line will get caught on that front hook. So if you're using straight braid, it gets caught all the time. It's a big bear. So I always use a short monofilament leader, and I just connect it with a crazy Alberto knot. If I'm using such a short leader, it's not going through the guides, so I don't have to tie like an FG knot, which I do with my flipping setup. But with top water, it's just a crazy Alberto. And like I said, I almost exclusively use 20-pound tests. If I'm fishing for smallmouth, largemouth, whatever, 20-pound.
And then what pound braid are you using on the reel?
So I like 30-pound. That's something I've become very comfortable with. I have never broken braid, period. I take that back. The only braid I broke was 70-pound down in like Florida. But anyways, I think it was a bad spot. But anyways, 30-pound braid with that rod and everything, like you're not going to break it. I think there's some guys that hate going below 40-pound with braid, but I really do find a big difference with 30 and 40 when it comes to casting, which I really like that 30-pound for. So
I'd agree with that. Now, are you like a stickler on like carrier count on your braid? Do you like a 5 carrier, 8? Have you tried any like the super braids that are like 12 and 16?
Yeah. So to be honest, I like the low carrier braids, the 4s, like your traditional Power
Like a J
Pro.
braid 4 or whatever it is.
Yep. So like your traditional Power Pro, even I think they're a 4 or a 5 carrier. I have used the 8s and the 9s carriers. I haven't used any of the ones that are above that. The big thing with that really nimble, like as you have a higher carrier braid, it's a very limp line. And I just have more issues with those lines, to be honest. I get more wind knots with them. And I don't think that I really lose anything in the cast. I think that's one thing that people think happen is that that braid's a little bit stiffer. You're going to lose some on the cast. But honestly, I think that because the braid is stiffer, it shoots through your guides easier.
You don't get as much like coil.
Yeah. It doesn't have as much coil. It's a straight line. So I feel like I lose nothing on the cast, and I feel like you have way less issues. Another thing that I found with that 8 and 9 even carrier braids is that every now and then when you're using those, you'll go to make a cast and you just like whip one. Like it's always when a freaking bass is out there blowing up. You go to whip one and it just locks up like halfway through the cast, like something like so minuscule just locked it up. The braid created a little loop because it's so nimble. So even on my spinning rods, I stick with like the 10-pound Power Pro. Like I like that lower carrier braid personally. So my buddy though, my fishing partner, he's all about like the Suffix 832. I think it's an 8 or 9 carrier, and he loves it. But I always like every time he gets a wind knot, I'm like, that's that 832 man is getting you. But
it's funny. Like if I'm making a long cast, like on top water, I don't mind a low carrier braid. But if I'm like flipping grass and I want like 50, 60, 70-pound braid, then I'll go up to like the super high carrier count just because I want it to be silent when I'm going through grass. But I feel like on the surface, if you have noisy braid, it doesn't matter anyways because you're making a commotion as it is.
Yeah.
So, but that's my personal belief. So let's kind of jump into color selection real fast. Like when and why would you choose a popper color? Is it based off of conditions or like the bait fish that is in the body of water that you're targeting?
Yeah. So for me, I keep colors super simple all the time, no matter what I throw outside of top waters and poppers, like even plastics. I keep things really simple. I think that most of the time, the green or purple flake that's in your worm does not matter. Like I think that there's an 80-20 rule in bass fishing. I think 80% of the time you fish, honestly, color might not even matter as long as you're kind of within the right range, if that makes sense. If I'm throwing a purple colored whatever or a pink colored whatever, yeah, the bass might not like that because there's nothing very natural about it. But for me, when it comes to a popper, there's 2 main colors I would say I throw most of the time, and that is kind of your shad pattern colors. So as you can see here, I have one over here. This is like a straight white or a bone color. It may be hard to kind of pick that up on the camera, but that's one that I throw a lot. That's kind of my cloudy condition, clear water type bait. If the bass are feeding on bait fish, that's what I'm gonna throw a lot of times. I throw it in off color water as well a lot. I don't usually fish popper in like really muddy water, but sometimes you're fishing in a little bit off color water. That's the one I throw a lot. If I'm fishing that clear water, it's very sunny out. That's when I'm going to use more of this one, which is a trans. It might be hard to see that, but it's more of a translucent.
That's like a ghost minnow color. It looks like, right?
That's exactly right. So it's your ghost minnow color. The big thing with that is in clear water, you tend to not want the bass to get a good look at your bait. So even when I fish other baits like jerk baits or glide baits or other top waters, I will use all those translucent colors a lot. I don't want the bass to get a good look at it. I want them to hear it and somewhat see it, but not get a great look, because you will see on days that you have those really opaque colors. So you have translucent, which means you can see through. You have opaque, which means you can't see through them. Those opaque type colors or those big whites, you will have fish that come up and you will literally see them looking at the bait and then swim back down. It's because they just know that's not real. So I use those translucent. Those are the two colors I use a lot. I use these a lot. Now, if I am fishing around fish that I know that are eating bluegill, that's probably when I change up the most, is to basically I'll have a bait that I just want a little bit of orange on the belly. I don't think I even have any set out right here right now, but like a bluegill has a little bit of orange on the belly. I always like to use a little bit of orange on the bottom of this one, but a bluegill has that orange. So if I know these fish are eating those bluegill, then I'm gonna have a bait that has a little bit of orange on the belly. I really don't even care what the backside looks like because they're not seeing it. So as long as it has a little bit of that orange, that's what I prefer. And then really the only other color that I'm gonna throw, and this is just more of like a sneaky one, is just straight black.
Everyone should have a black one in their box.
Everyone should have a black one in their box. My favorite black one I don't currently have right now, but usually I'll even have a black feather on it. Black is to me, it's weird. It's a natural color, but there are days where it's bright sunshine, slick, calm, and a black works really, really well. I think at times, honestly, bass think they're bugs, and that's why they eat them. You would think a lot of times, like I'll pick up a black, buzz bait or a black horny toad on really dark days because it's supposed to silhouette better, and that will work the same with this. But a black popper, like in the most weird conditions, it just seems like bass will eat that over anything else. And I truly believe that they think it's bugs of some sort, whether that's a mayfly, whether that's a beetle. Like I've caught smallmouth even recently. You open up their mouth and there'll be like 7 or 8 of these little beetles in them. And I think that's what they think it is at times. So a black one is one that a lot of guys don't necessarily throw. And it's one, like you said, everyone should have in their top water box because there's just those random days where it works really well.
Yeah, I found the black for me works best when there's like a small mayfly hatch going on, and also it has to correspond with the bluegill spawn because the bluegill, they're in their bluegill spawn will get that jet black color, and I just feel like the bass see that as, oh, there's a bluegill going up to eat that mayfly. That's an easy target, and I'm underneath them. I'm just going to come up and grab them real fast, and that's the way I think about it. But
yeah, that makes
from
sense.
like immediate post spawn up here in New York is like first week of June. So like first week of June through like halfway through July, I almost always have a black popper tied on, especially if I can see bluegill beds, and that's where I get bit on it. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's a bluegill. So one more thing you can add to your repertoire of good fish catching videos. Maybe you can do something like that on a bluegill spawn. So do you ever use a foiled popper?
I don't. And down in like the Carolinas where you have the blueback herring, those are the lakes where you see kind of the foil, even the chrome type baits, straight chrome that a lot of guys use. And I've used chrome walking style baits down there a lot, but I've just not gotten into the foiled enough, especially to talk about it. So that's something I haven't done. But it only takes one experience. I could tie it on, go out there, and maybe it puts a flash out that's a little bit deeper, that bass can pick up on. So, and I just haven't done it. So that's something I have not.
Yeah, I wonder if that would be something, like you're catching them on a bone one in the morning, and then all of a sudden that sun comes up, but it's still slick calm and they won't target the bone, but the water's not clear enough to go translucent. But
Mhm.
you think that they'll still come up and eat top water. I wonder if like throwing a foiled one on like starting at like 10 o'clock in sun, because when you pop it and the water's just clear enough that they can see that shimmy. I wonder
Yeah.
if that's when they'd be like a time that like I don't mess around with foiled ones either. So that's why I was asking your take. I just feel like it's always bone, black, or translucent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
or something with an orange belly when there's a bluegill spawn.
Yeah.
So which is all you need in a popper box, and have a bunch of different ones because every lake they want it just a little bit different. But I want to say thanks, Ty, for coming on. But I do have one last question for you, and it's the Do It Molds juice of the show. And the question is, if you can give anyone one piece of advice that's picking up a popper for the first time or who has never caught a bass on a popper, what would you tell them?
Um, as bland as this says, like, it is to just pick it up. And the big thing that I would not worry about is your rod and reel. I think that a lot in bass fishing, people don't pick up certain techniques because they don't feel that they have the right rod and reel for it. But man, when I first started picking up poppers, and they were a Rebel Pop R at the time, I was using kind of your standard like fisherman rod. I had a 6.5 foot rod with 10 pound. I think it was probably big game line on it. So
Berkeley Big Game, the OG of monos, the best
yeah,
ever.
yeah. So that's just what I used, and I caught so many fish, especially in ponds with that. And so I can remember just going out there and throwing it and having a good day with it. The other big thing with poppers, and I want to talk about this real briefly, but I think it's a super important. So probably the better advice that I have is that the one thing that separates a popper from a lot of topwater baits is that you can work this at different speeds than you can any other baits. With a buzz bait, they're coming at pretty much a certain speed. Sure, you can somewhat slow it down, you can somewhat speed it up. The same thing with a plopper style bait, pretty much the same speed. A walking bait, you pretty much constantly walk it. With a topwater, there are days, or sorry, with a popper, there are days where I work this really, really fast. I mean, like toot, 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 stop, toot, 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 stop. That's one of my favorite techniques where it's just really coming. But then there are days, where, sorry, I just got attacked by a fly, where you just pop this thing and just let it sit. So anytime you get to a body of water, the best piece of advice that I could really say is when you're making a cast, just experiment a little bit, working that bait really slow, working it really fast, and seeing when the fish bite. If they bite when it's really sitting there dead slow, then keep working it that way. If it's really fast, keep working it that way, and you kind of figure out a pattern within a pattern.
Yeah, love it. That's great advice. So thanks, man.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important that we should have covered sooner is that you should always vary your retrieve when throwing a popper. Let the fish tell you what they want. Don't
Yeah.
don't try to force feed them what they don't want, because a lot of times you'll miss them. This is where they blow up, as we were talking earlier, like 3 feet behind the popper, and you're like, why that? Like, how did he miss it by that far?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's like the most infuriating thing. And sometimes it's just either you're fishing it too fast or you're fishing it way too slow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to let you run now. Unless there's anything else that you think that we should cover on the popper. It's a rather rudimentary technique, but it's not at the same time because there's a lot of little tiny nuances that go with it. But a lot
Yeah.
of it is just experimenting and figuring out like the 3 or 4 poppers that you have confidence in learning what body of water or what day each one of them is working best based on the conditions. So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for joining us again, Ty, here on the Lure Lab. And I'm sure we'll have you on again here in the coming months once things level out for you. Maybe come fall, we'll get you back on and talk about another technique because we do enjoy having you on here. So, thanks for everything. And I hope you have continued success in the YouTube game. And Forgot to mention at the beginning of your show, you actually have a podcast now on YouTube on your Bass Fishing HQ channel. So tons of good information on there. So everyone who's tuned in, make sure you head over there if you're not already subscribed. So,
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. Have a good one, man.
You too, man. I'll talk to you soon. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the Lure Lab. I hope you enjoyed it. The popper episode is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while here. It's one of my absolute favorite techniques. And if you are on YouTube and you're new to the channel here on the Lure Lab, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment down below if your popper setup, your favorite popper baits. If you want to talk about it, we appreciate it. And it also gives me something to go out and buy and try myself if I don't have it already. If you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform that's MP3 based, please leave a review if you can. That'll help this episode be seen to more bass fishermen like you and I alike, and allows more people to see the Lure Lab here on the Serious Angler Network. And until next week, we will see you then.